Do I like the Goblin Army? No. Do I think it's the absolute worst event in Terraria? Oh, definitely not. That 100% goes to the Frost Legion. So why don't I like the Goblin Army? Well, I think to explain why I don't enjoy the Goblin Army, we first have to take a look at what the Goblin Army is. The Goblin Army is an evasion type event where, as evidenced in the name, you have to fight off a horde of goblins that are attempting to invade your world. This event serves two purposes. It serves as an introduction to invasions during early pre-hard mode, and it serves to be one of the first things you'll fight upon entering hard mode. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into why this event ultimately fails to accomplish what it was designed to do. There are two other pre-hard mode events that serve essentially the same function as the Goblin Army, those being Slime Rain and the Blood Moon. While initially this seems fine, it really begins to look bad for the goblins when we look at just how much these other two events outclass them. The first signs of this really start to show when you look at the criteria needed to start the Goblin invasion. You need to have at least 200 health and have broken a Shadow Orb or Crimson Heart. These are significantly higher requirements than the other events, with the Blood Moon occurring when you have 120 health and the Slime Rain occurring when you have 140 health and at least 8 defense. While waiting a bit longer isn't necessarily a bad thing, it can make the Goblin Army feel like a bit of a letdown when you finally get to it. One of the reasons it feels underwhelming is the sheer lack of diversity in the enemies of the Goblin Army. There are only 5 unique enemies in pre-hard mode, 3 of which being simple ground-based fighters. Compare this with the 7 new enemies and 2 new mini-bosses of the Blood Moon, and you can begin to get the memo. You could argue, however, that the Slime Rain is even less diverse than the Goblin Army, as 3 of the 4 enemies present are carbon copies of each other. While, yes, that's technically true, the King Slime spawning during the event, in my opinion, sort of offsets this. Now's a good time to mention a glaring flaw in the event. The loot is horrible. Let me explain with an example. Look at this Goblin Thief. What would you expect him to drop? Maybe some thief gear or a knife? Well, no, he actually drops spiky balls and a harpoon gun. Alright, well look at this sorcerer. He must drop some gemstones or mana crystals or something. Nope, he actually drops spiky balls and a harpoon gun. This warrior, spiky balls and a harpoon gun. This archer, okay, I think you get the point. This would be fine if the loot was, well, good, and while I admit that spiky balls are great for shredding the Eater of Worlds, the harpoon gun is pretty much worthless. There's an absurd amount of good early ranged weapons that can do better than it can. Even the Blood Rain bow, which is from the Blood Moon, can deal better damage than this. Additionally, the other 2 events provide some of the most important items you can get in pre-hard mode. The Blood Raid Bow, Vampire Frog Staff, Slimy Saddle, and Money Trough, just to name a few. The lack of good loot also makes the event feel stale, as about halfway through the event, when you're on your 5th Harpoon Gun and 300 Spike Ball, it becomes more about grinding through the next 100 zombies and less about the actual loot. So I'm editing my audio and I just realized that I said zombies instead of goblins, so I don't know, I'm too lazy to fix it. One thing that can be argued for the Goblin Army's loot is that most of the actual good loot comes from unlocking the Goblin Tinkerer. And while logic would dictate that this would improve the event, it actually works against it. This is mainly because it further accentuates the boringness of the second half of the event. Now, not only do you have all the loot, but you have to fight off these goblins to progress. Now, you could argue that the Slime Rain is in the same boat, but here's the thing. Fighting King Slime isn't required to progress, while combined accessories are pretty much essential for beating the game, making the Goblin Army non-optional. Additionally, you can just wait for the Slime Rain to end, while you have to defeat the goblins to end the event. Upon entering hard mode, 2 very important things happen. First of all, the Goblin Invasion and Blood Moon both get reworked. Second of all, there's new competition in the form of the Pirate Invasion. Let's look at the Blood Moon first. There are 2 new enemies, the Clown and the Chattering Teeth Bomb, and 3 new mini-bosses, the Dread Nautilus and Blood Squids, Hemogoblin Shark, and Blood Eel. This event also gives you some of the best early hard mode weapons, like the Drippler Crippler, Sanguine Staff, Bloody Thorn, and Bananarang. Now let's look at the pirates, which have 5 new enemies and 1 new mini-boss in the form of the Pirate Captain, as well as 1 new boss, the Flying Dutchman. The pirates also drop some of the most useful gear in the game, with weapons like the coin gun and pirate staff, and accessories like the discount card and lucky coin. Seeing this, you'd probably expect the goblin army would get some big changes, right? Maybe a new boss or new enemies. Well, don't worry, the Goblin Army solves this issue with the addition of literally one guy, the Goblin Summoner. And what does he drop? You guessed it. Spiky balls and a harpoon gun. No, I'm just kidding. To give credit where credit is due, all of the Goblin Summoner's drops are pretty solid, especially the Shadow Flame Knife, which is very effective for taking down the mech bosses. Unfortunately, while these weapons are great, they never really stood much chance going up against weapons like the Coin Gun and Drippler Crippler. Anyways, that's all I really have to say about the Goblin Army. If you have anything to add or if you disagree with any of my points, feel free to comment that. That's where I'm gonna wrap it up today. Bye everyone!